The Projection Booth podcast is sponsored by Scarecrow Video. Try out Scarecrow's rent-by-mail service. Choose from over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Visit scarecrow.com today.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off.
Turn it off.
Breakfast in bed, that's what he said he'd like to begin with. Him with the smooth skin, with the blank eyes. And it's surprising how it's progressed from there. Dare I hope, given rope enough, he'll be dope enough to marry me. We'll see. But we mustn't complain. Every now and again he will make it plain. He appreciates the pains we're taking, making him feel at home. So we sweat and we strain, entertaining Mr. Sloane.
Kath was the first to realize Mr. Sloane's potential.
What a smooth skin you have on you.
Hey?
Entertain, Mr. Sloane. Go on, give him the benefit of your experience.
But Dada wasn't at all keen on entertaining Mr. Sloane.
You? Who told you to take in lodgers?
Well, I needed a bit extra.
You know what they say about landladies?
And then Brother Ed saw the light.
Well, it must have been a rotten life for a kid. Being an orphan. Don't take any money from him, hard pay. It's going to work for me.
Can I buy him a shirt?
Buy his own clothes, making yourself look ridiculous.
Entertaining Mr. Sloane became a fiercely competitive struggle.
I'm quite eminent above the waist, as I expect you've noticed.
Women are like banks, boy. Breaking and entering is a serious business.
I wonder, Mr. Sloane, if you'd take your trousers off.
With me behind you, boy. You go out of it.
Mr. Sloane had his own ideas of entertainment.
Entertaining Mr. Sloane.
Starring Beryl Reid, Harry Andrews, Alan Webb, Peter McEnery as Mr. Sloane.
I'm going to the police.
You bring this on yourself, you know.
So
This was also a part of Mr. Sloane's entertainment.
entertaining Mr. Sloane.
Everybody wanted to entertain Mr. Sloane. And Mr. Sloane is waiting to entertain you.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Join me once again is Mr. Rob St. Mary.
I had the upbringing a nun would envy.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Jonathan Owen, though I might have to call you Joe.
The air around Toronto today is like wine.
We are discussing the 1970 film from Douglas Hickox, based on the play by Joe Orton, Entertaining Mr. Sloane. It is the story of a rentboy and murderer, Mr. Sloane, played by Peter McEnery, who comes into the lives of the strange Kath and Ed, and for a while, their father. We will be spoiling this film as we go along, so if you don't want anything ruined, please go ahead and turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen the movie. There's a really nice restoration of it out on Blu-ray now, so no excuses. Jonathan, I'm very curious, what is your history with Joe Orton?
He's somebody that I discovered when I was a teenager, actually, and I think I must have read the play of Entertaining Mr. Sloane when I was about 15, I think, and I had the book of the collected plays. I read certainly the major plays, And I think probably my introduction to him was the film Prick Up Your Ears with Gary Oldman and Alfred Molina, which is a really good film, I think, a really good portrait of Orton and of the relationship. I didn't see this film until much later, though. I'm not really sure why. I think I just never got a chance to see it. And I think the first time I saw it was in 2018 when the Blu-ray came out of this and of Loot. So I saw this and Loot pretty much back to back. It didn't make a huge impression on me at the time, as with Loot as well. Both films, they're very much under the shadow, really, of the plays, and they don't have a great reputation, although I think this has a better reputation than the film of Loot does. I think I liked it, though. I really liked the performances, especially of, I think, Beryl Reid, especially. So, yeah, I did like it, but I think I've liked it more the more I've watched it, and I think I've come to appreciate it more as a film, I think, the more I've seen it.
And Rob, how about yourself?
I did not know anything about this until I signed up. I had heard of Joe Orton, so I'm glad that John's on the show because he can give me the update on that, because I had, and it's been a while since I've seen it, but I have seen Prick Up Your Ears because I went through a whole like Oldman phase, when he was, getting his footing here in the States in the early mid 90s and working in a video store that had a big cult and foreign section. It was like, give me all the Gary Oldman. And so I know that I watched it in there, but I don't think I've seen it in 30 odd years or so. But, the first viewing, I was like, it's interesting. But it grew on me in the second viewing. And I was able to pick up on certain things and really get it. There's definite, character things in here that I really like. The thing, too, about it being a play and understanding that it's a play and that it was converted into a film is that I feel the director does well with not making it so stage bound. I mean, it is limited to a few sets, in that way. But a lot of times when you get those kind of play to film conversions, sometimes they can be proscenium and very kind of stiff. And that's not the case in here. And they find little ways to bring out the visual humor. Like for me, at first I thought, okay, that's interesting. Was the first shot in which the bus comes across and it's got the ad, and the ad says, "You look like you could use a rest." And then it ends right at the cemetery. So this kind of juxtaposition of humor, the juxtaposition of the cemetery, the funeral to the wedding. And there's just different bits in there. And then as I, gave it a second watch, I was like, I enjoy this, but it's definitely, as an American, having the background I have with my mother from Scotland and being raised around sort of British humor and British television, I think that also kind of helps. So if you don't have a sensibility, I think it can be a challenge maybe to the average American just looking for a, interesting little thing to watch.
Yeah, I was pretty unfamiliar with this as well. Like you, I'd seen Prick Up Your Ears, probably early 90s timeline. And that was a real revelation for me, not just in terms of Gary Oldman, but in terms of Alfred Molina, because I really hadn't been that familiar with Molina's work other than his work in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And when I connected that it was this little Latino guy and this tall, crazed, bald British guy were the same person, I was like, who? Oh my gosh, I need to see more of this Alfred Molina character. And then it's just been, an embarrassment of riches ever since. I mean, he's been in some really bad films, but at the same time, when he hits great. I mean, that was also such a nice experience with Gary Oldman. Really well told film. I rewatched it last night after, like you said, probably 30 some years. And it was a real treat to be able to see that again. And then when it came to Orton himself, I really still wasn't that familiar with his work. I had Loot on my watch list because I just watched that documentary about Silvio Narazano that our friend Daniel Kremer did and was like, oh, this looks interesting. This is so gay. It just seems like it was crashing down walls, almost literally in the film, blowing up walls. That whole naked robbery scene that they have. And then Entertaining Mr. Sloane, I just really wasn't that familiar with it. But it's funny, Jonathan, you mentioned Pasolini before we started recording. It kind of reminded me of almost like a reverse, is it Teorama? The one where Terrence Stamp comes in and sleeps with everybody. And here it's the young, sexy, hot man. I mean, really, you could have had Terrence Stamp play this role, but I really think that Peter McEnery does nail this role, and he is so beautiful in this particular role. The blonde hair, the muscles, everything. And yeah, I was just like, this is amazing. And I knew that I was missing so much without the subtitles. So like you, Rob, I had to watch it a few times just to try to get all of the language. And I feel like the language and the kind of crazy responses that people give to each other. I know that in the audio commentary for this, they were comparing Orton's work a lot to, say, like Monty Python. And I was like, yeah, I can kind of see that, especially when it comes to loot and the dead body and just how carelessly they treat the dead body. It so reminded me of, the funeral parlor skit from Monty Python, where it's like, well, we can bury her, we can burn her, or we can eat her.
Watching the film of Loot again, I realised there is a direct quote from Loot in Life of Brian. Because you remember the scene where John Cleese playing the Centurion arrests Brian? He says, "You're fucking Nick, my old beauty." That comes directly from Loot. So I'd forgotten that there was a direct quotation, which is wonderful, I think.
I actually thought for a little while that Richard Attenborough was playing two roles. I thought he was both one of the robbers as well as Inspector Truscott. And man, I've never seen Attenborough just have so much fun in a role.
Watching it again, I realized I actually quite like that performance. I mean, I know that Leonie Orton, Joe Orton's sister, has criticized it. And I can get that because I think the language of his plays, and I think that especially the language of the character of Truscott, it's already very heightened. And so I guess there is that argument that when the language is so overripe, you've got to kind of underplay it rather than overplay it. And of course, Attenborough really overplays it as much as he can. But yeah, I think watching the film of Loot again, I think on its own terms, it's something that I realized that it's actually quite fun, really. I mean, I think it doesn't have a good reputation. And I think in some ways it's probably more like one of the sort of typical British sex comedies of that period, more than a Joe Orton adaptation. But yeah, I think on its own terms, it's a pretty fun watch. It's never boring, I would say.
I really like when it comes to entertaining Mr. Sloane, how they, Robbie mentioned, we are taken out of the proscenium right away and taken to this cemetery. And to see Beryl Reid, she's practically naked in this role. She just has this super light sheer green top that she's wearing, or dress that she wears, and her kind of going around the cemetery. It feels like she's there for somebody's burial, but no, I think she's just there kind of wandering through the cemetery. I want to say the cemetery is very close to their house, and her just kind of going around eating a popsicle, very lewdly eating that popsicle. And then the introduction of Mr. Sloane himself, where she's there arranging some flowers, and you get this body rise up almost like a zombie or something, or Dracula rises from the grave, where it's him. He's doing calisthenics in the cemetery. I'm like, okay, but it almost looks like she's almost brought him forth from, okay, it's almost like a ritual with him kind of rising up, and she's just like, oh, a man.
And it's phallic as well, of course, isn't it? It's like a resurrection and erection at once, I guess.
When I lived in Grand Rapids, there was cemetery at the end of my street, about 3 houses away from where I lived. And it wasn't that unusual for me to go walk through the cemetery. I don't think I would eat popsicles in there and, do calisthenics. But, it can be a lovely place of contemplation. But I think that she definitely has other things on her mind. One of the things that I thought about in terms of her voice and her characterization is she reminds me of, this is just, like I say, based on my limited connection to British humor and things like that. I mean, granted, you said Python already in reference to another Joe Orton piece. She feels like she would live in the same universe as like the Python women, if you know what I mean. And also like one of the ladies from Are You Being Served? She feels like on a thread with them for some reason, to me, like as I was watching it. And her voice. And then the thing that I notice is, and I don't even know if he ever says what his first name is, because she always refers to him as Mr. Sloane. I think in the visual, you see that like the next to him is that name on the headstone real quick as they walk through.
Yeah, that's true, really. Yeah, because I thought about that and whether it's a name he's just taken from one of the gravestones. And I guess it references somebody that died in service. So if it is his father, that shows that he's lying when he's talking about his parent dying in the suicide pact. So yeah, either way, it's already casting some doubt, isn't it, about who he's presenting himself as?
Yeah. At the same time, he claims that he's an orphan, but he believes that he was, orphaned by a rich family, I think, is what he says. Oh, we had wealth. We had standing, of course,
Oh, God, yeah. And that's the thing that I do not understand when it comes to any of this stuff, this, Loot, any of the Orton stuff, is the class and the accents and those kind of things, where it's just like, even watching Prick Up Your Ears, it's like, oh, well, you got to get rid of that accent, and it's like, all right, to me as a dumb American, I'm like, well, I can tell different accents when it comes to places in England a little bit, but not nearly. I'm no Henry Higgins when it comes to like,
anyone can spot an Irishman or a Yorkshireman by his brogue, but I can place a man within 6 miles. I can place him within 2 miles in London, sometimes within 2 streets.
Peter McEnery is very deliberately doing a Leicester accent, which was the accent of Orton's upbringing. He was born in Leicester into a working class family. Orton himself had elocution lessons and then went to RADA. So I guess it was still that era when if you wanted to be an actor, you had to kind of just like, get rid of that regional accent so that you could be taken seriously and have a nice, posh speaking voice. And so Orton himself, from what I've heard of the extant footage of him and recordings of him, he spoke with quite a well-to-do accent, but I guess that's the accent he would have originally have had. Beryl Reid, I believe, was from Manchester, so I think there is a sort of a touch of a northern accent, but what I love about her voice especially is the way that there's a sort of a modulation from kind of a northern accent, a regional accent, to a more refined, more posh accent. And there's that constant kind of shift from one accent to another, which I think kind of matches the character and the way that the character, her language in some ways is quite, it's quite sort of vernacular speech. But then at times she's obviously trying to speak in this very refined, posh way, using this very formal, posh sounding language. And so, yeah, I think she's brilliant in the role, really. I think it's an ideal piece of casting, I think, because in terms of the class of Ed and Kath, it's kind of hard to really pinpoint that because the house they live in is so strange, isn't it, really? So it's not really immediately identifiable as belonging to a particular kind of class setting because it's just so strange. But I would kind of position them somewhere kind of like lower middle to middle class. Ed is kind of a bit more enigmatic because it's not really clear what kind of job he does. I don't know if you guys got the impression too, but I get the impression that when he talks about his business, there's something kind of criminal there. There's something a little bit kind of dodgy. And the fact that he never really tells you what he does exactly, I think is quite significant, perhaps.
There's a guy that I like to watch on YouTube who's a linguistics person from UK, and he refers to it as RP, or received pronunciation. It's supposed to be like, this is what you would work towards in that era to try and sound a very particular way, like how the BBC announcers sounded and how you would be taken seriously. I can understand that. The thing that's interesting, as you were saying, Jonathan, about sort of the house, is that the father he doesn't seem overly posh either. So they all seem to be strivers, so it seems like, at least I could take it as it's sort of all of them are trying to get somewhere or do something while sort of keeping up appearances, which has always been the thing that even I noticed in my own upbringing. It's like there's a certain properness. There's a way that we present ourselves to the outside world. Like in the house is one thing, but when we get outside the door, we have to be a very particular way. And the thing that I really loved about Ed's character is, as an American watching this now, you might not realize that a car like that, as ostentatious as it is in this film, would have been very rare in the UK, because like having an American convertible or a big car in the UK is just not, you just don't see them. And then on top of it, to have it be that ostentatiously Pepto-Bismol pink is like another layer. It really forces you to pay attention to him, which I guess is the point.
It's a really interesting choice, that car, isn't it? I know that that's been criticized for being too ostentatious and for kind of contradicting a little bit what the character is about, because I guess Ed, the whole point of his behavior is that he's very circumspect, isn't he? So the fact that he would draw attention to himself in this way doesn't quite fit. I do like it as a prop, though. I think it's a wonderful visual image. I kind of wonder whether there was a statement being made there about just the changing times, really, because I guess when the play was written, it was written in the early 60s. I think it was written in 63. It was first performed 64, and then the film is made 1970. And I guess between those 2 years, you have this whole change in terms of social morality, in terms of the law. You know, male homosexuality is legalized in 1967. So I wonder if there is a statement being made there about that change. But yeah, it doesn't really fit with the character, I think, in other ways. But yeah, as a prop, it's wonderful. I believe it belonged to a musician. I'm trying to think who it was. It wasn't Mark Bolan, but I think it was somebody in Mark Bolan's, I can't remember the name now of the musician, but it was much more kind of fitting to have belonged to a musician, I guess, rather than a character like Ed, I suppose.
Yeah, to your point, Rob, I remember being in London back in the late 80s and just how tiny the streets are. It feels like they're still made for carriages. And then when you would see, I remember seeing a big American car coming down the street at one point, not a pink Cadillac, but very close to it. Or whatever this car is. I love the hood ornament that it looks like a wrestler about to take somebody down kind of thing, this hood ornament. But yeah, when you would see an American car go down the streets, it's just like, wow, there is no room on either side of this. I'm surprised that it's not just scraping against the walls.
But at the same time, he does have this presence of like, I'm business, I'm serious. I will be taken serious in my look and how I'm outside in the world. There's this tension, I think. Ed's character, I think, really wants to be fully himself, but he can't. There's this, he still has to keep up appearances, and that's very important.
I really, really like Harry Andrews in this role, and I'm more familiar with him just as his tiny little role in Superman as one of the Kryptonian elders. And I believe he also sits in judgment of, well, speaking of Terrence Stamp, of Nod, Ursa, and Zod. And otherwise, I think I've seen him in The Night They Raided Minsky's, where he has this kind of crazy Amish type beard. But I'm not familiar with him otherwise, and he is wonderful in this.
He's also in Theatre of Blood, which was also directed by Douglas Hickox,
which we're going to cover later this year, which is wild. Yeah,
he's the very randy theatre critic. I was watching that again just in preparation for this, and yeah, it I think shows his versatility, because that's a quite different kind of performance. It's a much more flamboyant, actually. Although he's in this case he's a heterosexually randy guy rather than character like Ed, but yeah, he's got this little beard and he's much more kind of flamboyant figure. And I believe he often played like military roles. I think that's something that he was associated with. And I think he's in The Hill with Sean Connery as a very kind of aggressive sergeant. And I think that kind of baggage of the military roles makes him perfect here, because I think Ed is I think the whole point of his character is that I guess it's really going against what would have been like gay stereotypes at the time, because he's a very tough, just the way he's kind of physically presents himself. He's very kind of posed, very rigid. And I think he's meant to have been in the Navy as well, isn't he, in this film? And you see in one point in that photograph with his naval outfit. And yeah, I think that military baggage works really.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a man's man who's into men, especially in that one scene where they're talking about all that.
We're interested in the Navy, then? Sailors, uniforms, training ships, garrison towns, etc.
Yeah.
Married?
No.
Wise man. Girlfriends?
No.
No, you're a librarian.
No.
Oh, I thought you said...
No, I help out at Len's as a tobacconist, just on Saturdays.
Oh, I see.
He's a mate of mine, Len. You might have chanced to cross him. He was a sailor too. Lifeguard at the baths one time. Nice chap.
He's not a queenie queer man. He is definitely one who's very misogynistic, like has little to no use for women. If he could just live in a world of men, I think he'd be a much happier person, but that's the way he's characterized.
Apparently, I've seen him a lot because just looking very briefly at his filmography, he was in the 78 remake of The Big Sleep, which I've seen, The Medusa Touch, which we've covered, and The Passover Plot, which we also covered. So I've been seeing this guy a lot, but just not really connecting. He was even in The Final Program. So it's like, all right, I've seen him a bunch, but I just didn't really realize it.
He's in The Ruling Class as well. Have you seen that one, The Ruling Class? Because that's an interesting connection with this film. Another adaptation of a play that's completely insane. And he has a particularly insane, I think he plays the father of the Peter O'Toole character who commits suicide, or I can't remember if it's a suicide or if it's some kind of like autoerotic fatality type of situation. But yeah, it's a very strange opening scene that he does.
Hard day. Need to relax.
Might I suggest the silk tonight, sir?
Good idea, Tuck. For St. George, eh? Noose a bit high, Tuck. Get down half an inch. That's it.
And to your point, Rob, he will not be quiet about how much he hates women and is just like, don't get involved with those women. Don't do that. Don't do that, boy. Just always on that. When you think about the character of Kath, the Beryl Reid character, she seems to have had one of the worst lives ever. When you start to read between the lines and she starts talking about her baby that she had and that they took the baby away, sounds like she might have had a lover that they forced to leave as well. Just at one point, it sounds like there's an implied rape that happened, maybe from that lover, maybe from the baby's father, maybe that's the same person. But it's just like, wow, Kath has had a real hard life. And I like and dislike also at the same time the way that she keeps calling Mr. Sloane her baby, and that she wants to be baby's mama and she wants Ed to be baby's dad. And just that they are so involved with these mom and dad roles, and then having Alan Webb there as Dada, never has a name. I guess his name is Kemp, but they just keep calling him Dada the whole time. And I know I'm jumping very far ahead, but once Dada gets killed, it is all about just, well, let's cover up this whole murder thing because now we basically have Mr. Sloane where we want him. And I just love that this whole movie seems to be who's going to end up getting Mr. Sloane. Like they are so into that. And at one point when Ed is introduced after the pink car and he goes up to the room where Mr. Sloane is at and he's like lying back, he's got his hands behind his head. He's got nothing on other than his underwear. And at first, when Ed walks in, you think, oh, he's going to, be really angry at him. But as soon as he sees what a lovely figure Mr. Sloane is, he just changes his tune so quickly.
And Sloane recognizes it, doesn't he? He knows the impact that he has. So yeah, there's that calculation.
Oh yeah, he uses his body like a weapon. And you see so many shots that are just focused right on his crotch. It is wild how often this actor's crotch is just the star of the show.
There's a great moment when, I think he's with Dad in the scene just before he murders him. And he's talking about the photographer who did, I think he called it experimental studies. And he said there were certain interesting features about me. And he kind of like jabs his crotch towards Dada as he's saying it. And it's kind of interesting that the crotch, it's like a weapon, isn't it?
It is. And like the use of the sound effects when it comes to those curtains, when she brings back the curtains, or even when Ed takes the curtains and opens and closes them, there's a little sound effect. And I think that same sound effects gets used at one point when he thrusts his crotch at somebody.
I love the line by, I think it was the actor Dudley Sutton who played Sloane early on. I think he said about Sloane that the thing about him, the important thing about him, he has a salami in his pants, which is negotiable. That's like the core of the character. It's a great line, I think.
They see us on stage with tight trousers. We've got, armadillos in our trousers. I mean, it's really quite frightening, the size.
The Dada character, when Kath brings Sloane back to the house, and there's this, the three of them are kind of circling each other. I like his character, the old man. As a matter of fact, like all four of them, because there's really four characters in the film, are great. He is another one who also looks familiar to me. And his characterization, like I'm trying, like I say, on two viewings to really kind of understand. It's like, does he honestly believe that this man did something to him in the past? Did he like thieve from him? Did he steal from him or something like that? Or did he do something to someone he knows? Because at times I was a little confused as to, okay, well, how does he know this guy? Or is it just like he's demented and he just thinks that whoever she brings home is a threat? Sometimes it was a little unclear to me on that piece.
Yeah, I think he's meant to have murdered the Dada's boss, I think. But yeah, it's very oblique, isn't it? The way it explained it. It's not really clear how Dada first saw him or how he identified him. Obviously, his eyesight is not the greatest. And yeah, the whole thing is just such a massive coincidence as well. I mean, it's not realistic on any level that she would pick up the man that had murdered the father's boss. But yeah, I think that was the backstory.
And it's not quite a fisheye lens. It's a bit of a distorted look where you've got that close-up of him, of Dada, and he just looks like he's like in on him. And he's got, of course, those kind of Coke bottle glasses and such. And I was like, because there's the little visuals through here that I really, really enjoyed. Like I say, much more than I was expecting. I just thought, oh, this is just going to be, 4 people in a room kind of thing.
Yeah, there are some quite nice, kind of wide angle shots. They're, like you say, almost fisheye, which I think enhanced that kind of claustrophobic feeling. Yeah, one of the things I think the film does well is that on the one hand, it opens it out, I think, so that it doesn't just feel like a stage-bound piece, but at the same time, it manages to maintain that sense of claustrophobia or that sense of tension, which I think is where the film of Loot fails, really. I think that doesn't really capture that tension, which I guess Orton always wants to have. I mean, Loot is much more just of a romp, really, whereas I think this film does have a certain menace to it, I think.
I love that shot. You were talking about distorted things. The shot of Mr. Sloane in a mirror where it's like the top half of his head is way bigger than the bottom half, and he's kind of skewed across that nice broken mirror. And that's right around the time that Dada starts to confront him about this potential murder that had happened. And I don't know, I just 100% believe it. I was just like, oh yeah, he must have killed this guy before, because as we go along, it just feels more and more like he's on the lam from something. I mean, he really does feel like this kind of, I don't know, satanic or bacchanalian force that has come into their lives. And is he the one in charge, or are they the ones in charge? And that's what this whole play feels like to me, or this whole film, as far as the shifting power struggle that goes on. Because at first, I mean, it's probably 18, 19 minutes. It's basically the end of the first act of the film where we get Ed introduced. And until then, it's just, Kath and Dada and Sloane. So when Ed comes into it, it is just such a different power struggle now that's going on, because like you said, Ed, he doesn't broker any fools. He just is just like, okay, very, like you said, very military, very rigid. It's a man's life in the army type of thing.
I object in the strongest possible terms to this obvious reference to our own slogan, it's a dog's life, a man's life in the modern army. And I warn this program that any recurrence of this sloppy, long-haired civilian plagiarism will be dealt with most severely. Right. Now on the command cut, camera will cut to camera 2. All right, director? Wait for it. Camera, cut!
And then I was curious, as far as the Navy thing goes, how long has that stereotype of Navy men being gay, how long has that been going on? Because, I mean, obviously, I'm a fan of the Village People.
I got to thinking about that too. I mean, there's always been that kind of line, the hello sailor. That's always been, I think, kind of a coded gay joke, which you hear in Monty Python and Spike Milligan and things like that from the same era. Maybe that was the era when that was starting to emerge. I think that idea. Yeah, but there's always been. I know that people have made jokes, for example, about the Prime Minister Edward Heath, who was a bachelor, never married, and he also liked sailing. So there's been the odd joke about that he was a keen sailor. So yeah, I'm not sure actually. It might have existed from before this film was made or this play was written, but I got to thinking about that as well.
This was, I think, before the song Friggin' in the Rigging, which I remember from the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. But yeah, it just seems like it's always been there. So I'd be curious I don't know how I'm going to investigate that to be like, how long has this stereotype existed? But I guess when you get a bunch of young men on a ship with no women aboard, and wasn't it unlucky to have a woman aboard ship? That's what I remember from A Curse of the Black Pearl anyway.
It's interesting. It takes some of those, like, I guess, kind of like iconic sort of symbols of masculinity, doesn't it? Like the military or like sports, and it completely subverts them because there's a lot of stuff about sports, isn't there? About Ed having been good at sports when he was young, and then he has Little Sportsman as the mascot on his car. And then I think Sloane himself is talking about all the sports he does in a very suggestive way. He does like pole vaulting and all things like that.
Oh, God, yes. When he's there kind of massaging his muscles and making all of these poses while he's laying down. Yeah, the pole vaulting one especially just looks like he's got his hand around two cocks or a big one. And Beryl Reid, I'm not that familiar with her, I don't think. I've heard the name tons of times, but this performance that she gives, her sitting on the floor while she's tending to Mr. Sloane and his wound that her father, that Dada, gave him with a pitchfork. And she's just spreading out her legs and lifting her legs and just doing all of these kind of seductive poses. But it's so sad at the same time because she just is made up to look like that this guy is her Dada. It feels like they're about the same age rather than any sort of age difference between them. She just looks so put out to pasture with this, and not in a bad way. I'm not criticizing Beryl Reid herself. I just think this character is meant to look like she is way out of touch, like kind of those, like when the 1960s and early 70s, when movie companies were trying to make like hip young things. It feels like she's trying to be very hip, but she is so not hip at all.
Because the outfit she's wearing at the beginning, it's like a paisley. I mean, it's very much of its time, isn't it, really? But yeah, as you say, the ages is an interesting point, isn't it? I'd not thought about that. But yeah, I did look up the ages of the actors. And I think Harry Andrews, I think he was only about 5 years younger than Alan Webb. I think Beryl Reid was a bit younger. The age that it gives her in the film, I think it gives two ages. I think at the first point she says, in fact, she kind of hesitates, doesn't she? She says, oh, I'm 39. And then I think a little bit later, I think Ed says she's in her 40s. And the age that he gives is probably more accurate. But it is strange that, Dada does not seem that much older, does he really, than the brother and sister?
It's not as bizarre, but I was slightly thinking, and this would have been made right before, kind of like Alex's mother in Clockwork Orange.
Oh, yes.
Where she's got like the colored hair and she's got sort of the swinging 60s outfit kind of thing with the mini skirt, but it just doesn't work because she doesn't look right wearing it.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of Clockwork a couple times while I was watching this, especially Mr. Deltoid and just that predatory homosexual character. It feels at one point like Ed would just, clasp his hand down on Mr. Sloane's cock or something. But yeah, I was glad that you brought that up because, there was a feel of that. And just this whole thing, too, of how much they love Dada, or at least it feels like at first, like it feels like Ed's really trying to get, well, one, his father's attention, but also really trying to get his father's love. I mean, the very first time we see him, he's driving down the road in that incredible pink car and just chasing after his Dada, trying to get his attention at all. And it's like, there's no way he can't see Ed in this pink monstrosity just screaming at him, but he just keeps ignoring him.
That's the whole thing with, he's like, you have to get him to talk to me. You have to get him to talk to me. He keeps telling this to his sister. And I guess we don't understand why he won't talk to his son. I mean, we can theorize. It probably has to do with he's embarrassed by his sensibilities or whatever. And then when he finally breaks and he does talk to him, it's like, oh my God, it's
that scene. Yes.
It's like he's been given the greatest gift ever that his dad has finally paid attention to him. You could, if you wanted to read this uncharitably, if with a queer character, you could say, oh, that's why he's into men because dad didn't pay attention. I don't buy that. I've never bought that. There was a school of psychology around that time that sort of thought that, gay men like men because dad didn't pay attention to him. But I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah, that scene you mentioned is such a heartbreak because it's basically Dada coming to warn him about something or need something. and starts talking with Ed, and Ed is just having the best, like, oh my God, he's finally talking to me. And it's like, no, he really still doesn't give a shit about you.
Yeah, it's not for the purposes of like a reconciliation, is it? It's more because I think it's to tell him about what has happened with Kath, isn't it? And just to give that backstory about him. And so really it's for, the sake of just, warning him about Sloane. It's kind of got a practical function, really.
I love some of the shots. We were talking about how this does try to take things out of the stage. And some of these things, like when we finally kind of meet Ed and Mr. Sloane and Kath all at the same time. You've got that shot of Mr. Sloane looking out of the window of their house, and then the camera tilts down and it's a shot in a mirror. It's basically the rear view mirror. I don't know if it actually is the rear view mirror because it seems too big, but it's supposed to be the rear view mirror, and you see Kath and Ed talking about him, and then you move back up and then you see them coming out of the car. Or like Ed coming out of the car and still talking with Kath. Some really nice shots that they're doing here. And like you said, this doesn't feel like it is stage bound. And then when you get to the actual house itself, the stage that we would be bound to, what a wonderfully cuckoo place this is, with just things strewn everywhere. You've got like this fake parrot. You've got like a little dog head on the wall. Like, it is just so much bric-a-brac. If they shot this in black and white, you would think that they're living in the Addams' house.
And it's also like dark. It just seems like there's no windows open or something.
And you've got the stained glass as well, having those stained glass windows, which makes it a bit like you wonder, is this like a converted church or something like that? I think, the choices of objects really, I think, are perfect, because I went back to the play and I was looking at what kind of stage instructions they give, and there's very little actually in the play. I think the setting is only described as just a room. I don't think it says any more than that, really. So I think what the filmmaker did, I think, just added a lot of objects and decor, which I think does fit with the kind of environment and the kind of characters. I noticed there's a painting, I think it's in Kath's room, that painting of the green-faced woman. I think it's called The Chinese Girl. I think that was the original name of it, but I would say that's one of those kind of iconic images of a certain kind of, I would say there's a certain kind of like lower middle class respectability that tends to be associated with that painting for some reason. It's got a certain kind of cultural baggage. So I think the choice of those sort of objects, and then, like you said, there's the parrot and the gnomes, of course, the garden gnomes that we see. Yeah, I think the choices of objects are very careful and, very appropriate, I think.
The other thing that they use very well in this house, too, is the stairways. And they have some really good stairway shots. Like there's one where it's Kath and Dada looking at each other as Mr. Sloane's going up the stairwell. And Dada goes to turn and look at him, but she pulls his head back. So they're in the foreground, he's in the background. And you get a lot of that, too, when Ed's going up to finally talk with Mr. Sloane. And those beautiful stained glass windows like that you're talking about, when he opens up lines and it's the two angels, one playing a trumpet and I don't know what the other one's doing, but just now we've got the light in the room. Now he sees Mr. Sloane and now his whole story changes. And I love how he's just like, well, you can come to work for me and you can be my chauffeur. And the very first time we see him, he's in the passenger seat. He's not driving this car. He's in the passenger seat in this beautiful brown buttery leather outfit, and that you even see Ed when he's driving his car, he's wearing a leather cap, not like a leather fedora, it looks like, rather than Dada's wearing a cloth one, and letting his little freak flag fly a little bit with that leather. But then, he knows what he likes when he dresses Mr. Sloane. He's very controlling when it comes to that.
And I noticed watching it again that there's a scene where I think Ed is polishing the mascot on the car between the legs with and then I think from that scene, you go to the one with the tailor, and then the tailor has the tape measure between Sloane's legs. So, it's like making that connection, isn't it, really? That, he's kind of making Sloane into his little mascot, just dressed as he wants him to look.
The looks on his face, that kind of lascivious look where he's just kind of smiling over, and he's got that little mustache, and it looks like he's definitely wearing a wig of some sort. Harry Andrews just plays this role to the hilt, and I've never been able to see him chewing up stuff as much as he is in this one. Like, now I need to go see The Hill, like you were saying, and some of these other films. I can't wait to see Theater of Blood now after seeing this Hickox film. And yeah, I'm really excited now to see more of him because he is just wonderful in this role.
The thing that I love about him and Sloane hanging out, the scene for me is the pool scene. He's like, let's go to the pool. And he's like, why would you want to do that? So they go to the pool. And of course, he's still decked out in his suit. And he's sitting there while everyone else is in their swimsuits and such. And he just looks completely uncomfortable. This is not a place for him. And I think that's where we get the conversation piece about, oh, why would you want to deal with these women? Like, do yourself a favor, boy. Don't be messing with those women.
I have a certain amount of influence, you understand. Friends with money. They could be a help to a lad like you. I myself am the possessor of 2 bank accounts. I generally spend my holidays in places where the bints have got rings through their noses. Does that impress you?
Yes, I'm impressed then.
The way these birds treat decent fellows. Hope you never get serious with one. What a life. Backache, headache, or a mum told her never to when there's an R in the month turns me up.
Ah, you're too sensitive.
That's right, I just don't give a monkey's fart. What's your opinion of the way these women carry on? Don't you think they're crude?
Occasionally, in a way. All the same, it's necessary.
Oh, now you're talking of a different subject entirely. It's necessary, I grant you. Occasionally. It's got to be kept within bounds. I can deal with them, same as you.
On the main points we agree, I'm sure.
I can deal with them, same as you. And that's an interesting line because I think that suggests that he is a bit like Sloane, that I think when he needs to do, he can sleep with women and he can kind of be flexible just in the way that Sloane is. And to me, it's making a kind of an analogy between the two characters, really.
Well, if I need to get a lady pregnant, I can get a lady pregnant and carry on my line. But otherwise, screw all women. I don't need them for anything. That's their only purpose in life.
Talking about the misogynistic, this is something that people have often discussed in relation to Orton's work as to whether it is misogynistic itself or whether it's just depicting misogynistic characters. If you read Orton's diaries, which are a great read, by the way, but quite maybe shocking now in a different way than how they were shocking at the time. But yeah, he does make rather kind of unsavory remarks about women himself. And so I think there is that question as to whether he was really being misogynistic himself or whether it's just illustrating the misogyny of society. And I mean, I would say in relation to Kath, I mean, I would say she is quite a sympathetic character. I think we do feel, or at least a poignant character. I think Emma Parker makes the point in the commentary that, she's always being referred to as like a nymphomaniac, basically. And yeah, I mean, she's only had the previous, partner that we know about who possibly raped her, possibly abused her, and then Sloane. So, you don't really get much other evidence of that, really.
Not being as familiar with his complete catalog, I mean, I sort of see these characters as commenting on people in society. Like, I mean, you could take the Ed character and say, this is business. This is, the guy who puts on the suit and goes to work every day and puts up the front, he's a well-respected man. I think of the Kinks song or something with him, he gets up and he goes and he takes the train and he does the thing. And there might be some unsavoriness in there. I don't know, but I really get the idea that he's trying to keep up appearances. I mean, in the case of Kath, it's like, I mean, what mobility was there? I mean, I'm thinking about this character, she would have been about my grandmother's age. So I'm like trying to think of like, okay, my grandmother was like 20 when the war breaks out in like 1940, and so it's like, what do you do? Like, what is your expectation? Your expectation is family, children. Maybe you get a small job outside of the house, but you're not the breadwinner, and your whole world is controlled by the men. It's interesting to me that if you were watching this contemporary in 1970, or even seeing the play, like you say, a good 6-7 years earlier, there's probably, that kind of commentary, that interplay, with what was happening contemporary. So we have to kind of pitch ourselves back a little bit and think about how gender was and class was and expectation. And I think that kind of helps. As to the piece of what you were talking about, Mike, about Sloane, I just see them all as, if I was going to kind of distill them down into one thing, it's just hurt people. I mean, they all seem to be hurt in dealing with something, and they're just getting whatever it is that they can get, from each other. And these leads to, at some point someone's has power over another. And it just kind of is a seesaw battle of the wills, I guess, is what you could say.
They use violence to get ahead, but not a lot. It's more implied violence, like when Ed finds the lipstick in the car that Mr. Sloane has taken out a few times and finds that, and then Ed goes into the trunk and finds a shotgun, and he just starts shooting off the shotgun, and at first you think he's shooting at Mr. Sloane, but then you see Sloane behind him, and the way that he keeps asking questions and the way that Sloane's answers change as he starts to continue to shoot that shotgun. It's like really exerting that power. And I agree with you. It does feel very man about town, doing all those things so conservatively. I can really see that when it comes to this Ed character, just putting up those appearances, even though, like we were saying, the place that they live is so strange, so odd. And it's not just on the inside, it's on the outside as well. I mean, that he's practicing with his shotgun or has a shotgun, just shooting an armoire in the yard is kind of strange. But the thing that I mentioned almost right at the top is the language and how clever the language is with this play, with this screenplay as well. And I think Clive Exton, comparing the play versus the screenplay, I think Clive Exton did a pretty good job of capturing that tone. And a lot of the lines from the play are directly in here, but they didn't need to make a few changes. I really, really love the language of this. And I think that's why we're still talking about Orton today, because this could turn into just a sex comedy from the 70s, like you mentioned with Loot. I mean, it doesn't capture it nearly as well as this one does. As far as the clever turns of phrase, like I said, the way that you have a character say something and then have the other character respond, and the response is maybe it plays upon what the first character said, maybe it completely twists what the first character says and then says it back in a different way. I just really appreciate that love of language that you get, and that's the thing I think Orton excelled in so well.
Yeah, there's that constant kind of juxtaposition, isn't there, of different registers of language. And for example, I think near the beginning when Sloane refers to Dada, he says, you superannuated old Pratt. And I mean, that's a brilliant juxtaposition of quite a formal word with a very kind of like vernacular word just jammed together. And yeah, I think there is that constant. I think one of the reasons his plays, apparently they're quite difficult to perform and they're quite difficult to get right. And I think Emma Parker says that she's seen more bad productions than good productions of his plays, because I think knowing how to pitch it as an actor is very difficult, because I guess it needs a certain degree of stylization, but without too much, without taking it over the top. And it's really just like a collage of different styles of language, really. And a lot of the language I think is very coded too. So, for example, I think Kath refers to the living room as the lounge. And I think in British English, I think lounge has a particular kind of class connotation that common people, so-called, were meant to say lounge rather than a more posh word like living room. So I think there is always that kind of pinpointing of class distinctions through the language like that. And it's also a way of illustrating the character's aspirations too, isn't it? That they want to be seen as posh. And they try and show that in the language that they use.
There's little things like when they talk about somebody being dead, it's like, well, she's as dead as 40 dodos. And it's like, you could easily just say she's dead, but then to add that little flourish on top of it, and it doesn't feel stagey. And that's the thing. Like when I watch, and I always bring this one up, watching something like 6 Degrees of Separation, you just feel that you are watching a filmed stage play. They try their best to take it out of the stage, but just the delivery is so flat and so to the rafters kind of thing. And here it feels like we're watching two people talking, not two people on a stage talking.
I think that's partly to the credit of the actors, isn't it? And I think the way they savor that language without overdoing it. I guess it's also because the characters themselves are performing, aren't they? I suppose they're trying to maintain an appearance. And so it's somehow grounded in the reality of the characters, I think.
I know that the ending of this is not the same as the play, and I'm trying to remember how the play ends. Jonathan, do you remember how it ends?
Yeah, so the play really just concludes with Ed and Kath alone. I think Sloane actually leaves before the ending, and so Ed and Kath, they just make that arrangement to share him, and a lot of the language, a lot of the lines are the same, but it's much shorter, and it really just ends with that. I think Ed leaves, Kath is just alone at the end. I guess curtain falls. So the ending of the film is much more extended. So you get that whole sort of double marriage sequence, and then scene of the three of them where each of them kisses Sloane, and you close in on the close-up, and finally you see his expression. So I guess in the film, you get his reaction to the arrangement, which you don't get in the play. You don't really know how he is going to feel about that, really. So, I think that's been criticized. I mean, I quite like the ending of the film. I think I just love I love his expression at the end. I love the whole setup where you have the dead body, you have the wedding, the double wedding, and to me, it's another kind of just subversive jab at social institutions, because you bring in the whole marriage, the marriage ceremony. And I kind of like the idea that, you're just trashing another institution like that, which I think is in an Orton-esque spirit, really. But I guess people might say you're kind of just like over-egging the pudding a little bit, and the play leaves a bit more stuff implied, I suppose.
My note that I put down is a free room becomes the jail cell he never imagined. The thing that I liked about it, and this is interesting, if in the first half, like sort of Sloane's leading the way, I don't think he actually says this out loud anyway, but he's probably thinking it. It's like, I can just play these people. I can get a room, I can get food, I can get, I can just scam these people into whatever I want. When it comes to the ending, just that look that he has, it's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of screwed now. So I really love that turn, as you were saying, Jonathan, about sort of the solemnity of social order and ritual, which is what we see destroyed with the whole cemetery and, funeral eating popsicles in the beginning, the wedding piece and all of it. I just thought that the ending it just felt delicious to me. It was just very humorous. Like I really liked it. Because I kept thinking, like, when I was watching the first time, like, I don't know, this is going to end, Like, I really didn't have an idea, to be honest. Sometimes you can kind of see it to being telegraphed, but it didn't feel that way to me as we were watching this one.
No, not at all. And I love this, taking things and turning them on their head, that towards the end, he is just a pawn for both of them. Now that he is murdered Dada, and it's like, okay, we have this on you now. And I love when she's like, well, I'm going to get married, and grabs the Bible out of Dada's dead hands. You've got Dada just laying there. He's starting to turn green and putrefy. He's got that big gash across his head. He's got the candle there. And so many of the shots, he's just in the foreground and they're in the background and doing their stuff, like having that first wedding. Again, turning it on its head. This is 1970. This is not 2015, turning this wedding on its head and saying, okay, now you're going to marry him as well, Ed. And then having that big kiss at the end. And I love that how Mr. Sloane looks from one to the other, kind of looks at us a little bit as the audience, and then does this kind of, it's a living kind of thing, like the pig who's under the sink in the Flintstones, like eating all the garbage,
I know I look ridiculous, but it's a living.
And then that's how we end, with that beautiful scroll work around the end, and that it says amen and not the end.
Yeah.
Oh, so nice.
The other bit with this is that leading up to that, I love how they negotiate what they're going to do with him in front of him. And he's like, whoa, wait a minute. He's like, who asked you? Shut the fuck up. And it's like, we're talking here. The adults are talking. It has this feeling of, and I can't pinpoint a movie like this, but it's like, I know that I've seen in films before where like someone's been kidnapped and then like the kidnappers are debating, and then the person who's kidnapped is like, whoa, wait a minute. It's like, shut up. Like, you're a non-entity here. That attitude, just made it even more delicious for me in the end. It's like, well, you're trapped now. You got what you wanted, right?
Yeah, something that I thought of in relation to this, it might be a little bit of a remote reference, but the Sorcerers, the Michael Reeves film with Boris Karloff and Ian Ogilvy, because a very different story, but I guess similar idea about it's like the older generation controlling the younger generation, isn't it? And I guess this is an interesting comment to be making in the late 60s, early 70s, when it's all about the youth culture, youth revolution, showing that it's really the older generation that's still the one in charge, I guess.
You have freedom to a limit, the limit that we'll give you kind of thing.
The Mr. Sloane song that plays in this, I was really hoping to find a good copy of that, and hopefully I will before we put this episode out to air. I really like that they have this little Georgie Fame song of entertaining Mr. Sloane at one point, because we're going to talk a lot more about music when we come back and we talk about loot. And Mr. Sloane, it's not necessarily directly addressing everything that's happening on screen, but it really adds to this. And I was really glad that song's in there. It's a real banger.
It was an era of having theme songs in movies, that would reference the title in that way. And it plays a few times, if I remember. Not quite as many times as when we did Adios Amigo.
No. Jesus Christ.
Where I said, I remember on that episode when we did that, I was like, yeah, we paid for this song. We're going to fucking use it. It shows up enough. Like I said, I probably have to watch it again and see how it's used, but it feels like it plays in the same way that sort of these theme pieces work within cinema at that era, but it also seems to comment on the fact that it is a little bit, because I don't think those lasted too much longer. I don't think there was a lot of, we're going to write a song and put that song in the film that isn't, for like a musical or something like that.
One thing that I found that I thought was going to be more interesting than it was back in 2014, Robert Whitey, who we've talked about many times in this podcast, our Mother Night episode, he created a comedy drama series called Mr. Sloane with Nick Frost, and unfortunately, it has nothing to do with Joe Orton, as far as I know. He's a hapless accountant. So, all right, I was really hoping that Robert Whitey would have made a whole Mr. Sloane TV show, but unfortunately, it's more of a situational comedy, a 6-part series. So, wasn't able to see much other than the trailer, and I'm sure it's out there, but I was really hoping that we were going to get a revival of this Sloane character, maybe even check in with him 20 years after he's murdered Ed and Kath, because that's the thing is what happens 5 minutes, 5 weeks, 5 years after this movie ends? I mean, Mr. Sloane has no problems with murdering people. Is he going to kill both of them in their sleep, or is he actually going to be basically their prisoner, their own personal rent boy?
It could go either way, couldn't it, I think? Because I think you get the impression that Ed is probably, he's probably at least a match for Sloane, I think, in terms of his toughness. So, yeah, I guess, it could go either way, really.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back right after these brief messages.
It's not easy having a good time, and it's not cheap either. Every week, the projection booth brings you a new show, possibly even 2, focusing on all genres of cinema. If you've sat through the 7-hour Conan episode, the 6-hour Star Wars episode, or even the hour-long Superman episode, you know that Mike and his co-host put forth a lot of work into researching the movies, tracking down the interview subjects, and putting together one of the best podcasts on the internet. Now I'm asking you if you can repay all that hard work by giving back to the projection booth. The show has a Patreon fundraiser at Patreon. That's patreon.com/projection booth. You can donate as little as $1 a month. That's $12 a year. At least 50 great shows and 2 terrible ones. That's the price of 2 matinee tickets. Now, isn't the projection booth worth it? Once again, that's patreon.com/projection booth. Donate today. It's the right thing to do.
Looking for something superior to streaming? A place with more than 5 times the selection available on all streaming services combined? Check out Scarecrow Video's Rent by Mail service. Select from an unparalleled collection of over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Get in on it now at scarecrow.com and rediscover the wonders of physical media. That's right, we are back and we're talking about entertaining Mr. Sloane, but really let's talk a little bit more about Joe Orton. A lot of good stuff about Joe Orton out there. I was happy to see there's a episode of the TV show Arena, which I've seen quite a few episodes, not nearly as many as they produce, because they produce, hundreds of episodes, I think, but every once in a while I'll find one like about Philip K. Dick or this one about Joe Orton, where they seem to concentrate a lot on his library book scandal. And then you get more of just him overall in Joe Orton Laid Bare, which I found to be a really interesting concept because it's narrated or stars a person who is in that Joe Orton role. And as I see him, I'm just like, this guy looks a lot like Joe Orton. But then as I was watching it, I was like, wow, Gary Oldman really does look a lot like Joe Orton as well. Or at least he made himself look that way and prick up your ears. And how interesting that Gary Oldman plays such iconic British characters between this and Sid Vicious and then fucking
Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill, yes.
Which I think is especially funny because Orton's last play, which I think is his best play, actually, What the Butler Saw. Sorry, this is a terrible spoiler, but that play climaxes with, there's this whole backstory about this statue of Winston Churchill that was destroyed, and certain, I guess, interesting features of it were lost. And it ends with this character just brandishing this penis of Winston Churchill statue. So the fact that the same actor could play Joe Orton and Winston Churchill, I think, is wonderful, really.
Yeah, and all of them met such terrible ends. I mean, especially when Winston Churchill got beaten to death with a hammer.
There's one thing I do know about Churchill. He was an excellent painter.
Nobody ever said a bad word about Winston Churchill, did they? No, when we're swimming! Churchill! With his cigars, with his plenty, and his rotten painting, rotten! There was a painter. He could paint an entire apartment in one afternoon, 2 coats!
Before we start to talk about these other Orton things, I do want to talk about Loot a little bit because I watched it for this episode as well. I think I liked it. I think I liked it a lot. Like you said, it is overplayed a little bit, like that Richard Attenborough character. Even the Lee Remick character is a little overplayed, but I found it enjoyable. And the thing that I really did want to bring up was the whole musical aspect of it, where you have these songs that are basically commenting on what's going on in the movie, which I kind of appreciated that. And it's not as strong as of a film as Entertaining Mr. Sloane, but it definitely has some merits to it.
Yeah, I think the function of the music, it makes more sense really in Loot, because I think the plot is a lot more complicated. And I guess from the 3 major plays that he did, I guess he went through this progression more towards farce. So I guess Sloane has some kind of farcical element to it, but Loot is much more obviously a farce. And then by the time you get to What the Butler Saw, that's almost like meta farce. I mean, that's like so farcical. It's like so many like entrances and exits and confused identities and things like that. And strangely enough, I think it's probably harder to translate theatrical farce to the screen, I think, than it is a play like Mr. Sloane. So I think perhaps Loot had a more difficult play to work with, really, because I think there's all that stuff about the body and, you're kind of like trying to take the body from one place to another place. And I think that kind of thing works better on stage, perhaps, than it does on film. I think on film, it just looks a bit too artificial. And so, yeah, I think Loot probably had a tougher job with the source material.
It feels very screwball comedy with the way that body's being moved around. It feels almost like Arsenic and Old Lace, where they are constantly moving these bodies around. And, is it in the cellar? No, it's inside of the banister by the window or the cupboard by the window, these kind of things. I like that. I also like that they just kind of are, like I said, are very unceremonious about treating the body, the way that they just kind of throw it into a closet, that she's on her head quite a few times. Talking about Orton, there's this whole thing about teeth and this whole thing about the teeth that are used, because you even get that in entertaining Mr. Sloane, where at one point Kath's character can't find her teeth, and then in this one it's like the corpse is missing its teeth, and then you get that comes back in Prick Up Your Ears, where his mother, Orton's mother in that one, is missing her teeth. They're standing around her corpse at home, which is a tradition that we don't necessarily do here in the U.S. as far as I know, maybe in certain cultures, but having the body presented at the house is not something that we necessarily do. So it was very odd to see all these people at the house with the corpse there in the casket. And yeah, they start talking about like what happened with her teeth. And then you see later on Oldman as Orton handing these teeth to one of the actors and saying, "These are my mother's teeth," and sending him out on stage like right at that point. Yeah, it's funny how teeth like kind of wend their way through all of these Orton things.
I guess it was a sort of a comedy staple, wasn't it? I think false teeth, it's just one of those things that's considered like inherently funny whenever you just throw it in as a comic device. And yeah, I think a lot does relate back to Orton's mother as well. I think I've even read that she was actually the basis for the character of Kath. So I think there was a sort of an issue there with his mother. I believe I've read that Kath was based on his mother, and then Dada was based on his father, who seems to have been a rather meek and rather kind of nondescript kind of personality. I think the mother was a much stronger presence, and given the way that she's played in Prick Up Your Ears by Julie Walters, I mean, it seems that she was very much a kind of a comic figure in her own right, really, even if kind of maybe unintentionally.
The teeth thing is interesting, and this is something that like I said, I haven't seen the one you were talking about, but there was a podcast that I listened to recently that went into why is it that we have this joke about British teeth, and where does this come from? And it was saying, and I know this from my grandparents, that right after the NHS was created, the first year after the NHS was created, they did 1 million false sets of teeth. Because in England before that, I mean, they didn't have fluoride like they had in the States, dental hygiene, things like that. Teeth were difficult to deal with. But not just there, but also in the States. They were saying that basically teeth were awful for a long time for this podcast. But they said that when the NHS came in, it was considered the thing to do was to get your teeth pulled and get false teeth. And so my grandparents both had false teeth by the time they were in their 30s.
Wow.
And
I think my grandmother,
Yeah. And so there was an era that came right out of World War II when the NHS was created in the late 40s that they all, their teeth were mangled. So they just got them pulled and they all got false teeth. So as a kid, I remember going to my grandmother's and, I would stay over and she put her teeth, in the thing. And I just thought it was weird. I was just like, my other grandmother didn't have false teeth. Why, I'm a little kid, so I don't know. But I know that it was a thing. It was like if you could do it and the NHS was going to take care of that for you, that was your way of sort of improving your image. It was considered like the thing to do in the late 40s and early 50s. So the idea that Orton's mother, who probably was about the age of my grandmother, would have, false teeth isn't that out of line with, I guess, what was going on in Britain at the time.
I never had heard about that. That's fascinating. Talking about having the funeral or having the showing at the house. Also, there was this whole thing of, and I was just talking about a French film called The Visitors, where there was a dentist who works out of his house. It's kind of the same thing, if memory serves, when it comes to England, is that the dentists would basically work out of their house. Like I remember walking around Tolworth, England, and seeing like signs like, basically a dentist lives here. Like this is the dental office, and it was just a regular old house. So again, something very different from what we're used to here in the States.
I mean, even in the late 1800s or turn of the century in the States, where I lived in Grand Rapids, there was a Victorian house that was built in the late 1800s, and I lived in the parlor, which they told me it was the house of a physician, and they're like, where you're staying used to be where you would take patients. So, and that's where you get the term, I come to understand in America where you get the term funeral parlor, was because they used to put people in the parlor of the house, and then they moved them out of the house And all of this just became, the professionalization of, the funeral industry, because before it wasn't like that. It was like, oh, someone died. All right, put them up in a room in the house. Everyone come visit. And then we bury them like a day or two later. They don't embalm them, or, they don't stick around too long.
And I wonder if our funerals happen faster than they do now, because sometimes it feels like somebody dies and then it takes quite a while before they get buried, as opposed to like a Jewish ceremony where it's just like, no, it's basically very quick, like almost next day type of thing.
I mean, like I said, part of that had to do with they didn't really start embalming, at least in the States, until around the Civil War, because it was like they had to send bodies home on trains. So it was like, we got to keep the bodies a little bit so we can get them back home. But, typically they didn't do that. It was like, well, and plus you figure people lived in close. So it was like, okay, someone died. Tell everyone in town, get here. You didn't have to travel at huge expense or distance like you do now in the modern world.
Yeah, of course, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of Donald Sutherland in The Great Train Robbery.
Yes, I just thought of that, with the blue face, yeah.
Yeah, and they put the dead cat in the casket with them so it smells appropriate. Because even in this one where it's like they live in a hotel, I think, in Loot, and when they pull into it, it's very much the sign for the hotel almost looks like they're pulling into another cemetery. Like there are a lot of interesting similarities between these two films, written by the same author, came out within 8 months of each other. I think Mr. Sloane came out in April, and this one came out, I think it was like December 31st, 1970. So, really right into 1971.
And it's funny that in the original play of Entertaining Mr. Sloane, it's not set near a cemetery. It's actually a rubbish dump, I think. So the film added that, the graveyard, the cemetery motif, which I think is interesting because it does feel faithful to Orton's sensibilities, really, because, funerals do and graveyards do kind of recur throughout his work. So, I guess it has similar kind of resonance, isn't it? Because it's about your death and death and rebirth and things like that. So there is a kind of a connection. But it's interesting that the film added that, I guess. It's just more visually interesting, I suppose, than a rubbish dump.
That makes a lot of sense because of all the bric-a-brac that they have at their house. Feels like they would have lived next to a rubbish dump and just pulled in like, oh, this armoire is fine for me to shoot at, or any of these other things, because, they have such weirdo decorations. And really kind of the same thing with Loot as well. When you look around their house, which doesn't necessarily feel like a house, it feels more like a soundstage, but yet you get like all the flowers, the sombreros on the wall, the guitar that's hung up on the wall. And it's almost like each room has a different theme to it. I mean, it's very similar insofar as having way too much stuff in each one of these rooms and them just feeling so incredibly cluttered.
Did you guys ever see the English sitcom Steptoe and Son, which was later remade as Sanford and Son in America? To me, I kept thinking of Steptoe and Son while I was watching both Entertaining Mr. Sloane and Loot, because the figure of Dada, especially, is very reminiscent of Albert Steptoe. He even likes pickled onions, which is a thing that Albert Steptoe liked as well. And of course, Steptoe is famous, and Sanford and Son too, for that kind of junk-laden interior with just like random things everywhere, like a skeleton or like a stuffed bear and things like that. And the co-writers of Steptoe and Son actually wrote the script of Loot. So I think there's a big connection there.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because the actor, and I know they're two different actors, but the Dada character in Entertaining Mr. Sloane slightly reminded me of that actor who played in Steptoe and Son, which I would say most Americans know as the grandfather of Paul McCartney in Hard Day's Night.
He's a nice old man, isn't he? He's very clean.
So he's the same guy, the same actor. So like with just the glasses and the kind of the look,
Yeah, he's got the kind of like grubby appearance, hasn't he? And there's one point when he's talking to Sloane and he's very close in, and Sloane just like reacts, and you can tell that like his breath must stink. And it's like, he's just that kind of similar kind of grubby figure to Albert Steptoe. Because I think Steptoe started in the 60s, and I think it was playing around the same time. I guess come out of the same world, really, of this world of kind of like grubbiness and also kind of like aspiration, I suppose, because Steptoe is all about aspiring to kind of move beyond your class. And I guess that was sort of I guess still is a big theme of British culture, really, because we're so class-ridden, I guess.
I really like the actor in Loot. I think he's Miles O'Shea, who's the father in this one, whose wife dies and was being nursed by Lee Remick. Lee Remick looks amazing in this movie with her platinum blonde hair, her little beauty mark that she has, her very bright red lips that she's doing. She almost looks like a flapper who traveled through times. And I mean, it's within 5 minutes of the wife being dead that she's like, well, no, you're going to have to marry me. And it's just so like matter of fact. And it's interesting because this one has a couple storylines going on. You've got this whole thing of the father and this nurse, and then the nurse plays into the two young men as well. And then, yeah, this whole thing of the two young men, one of them is the son. Are they both the sons? They're not brothers, right? Because the limo driver, or the hearse driver, I should say, he is outside of the family, I want to say.
Yes, that's right. And then, yeah, Hal is the son of the Milo O'Shea character. So that's his mother. Yeah, that's right. And then the two guys are lovers, basically.
But they'll shag anything. I mean, they're shagging a meter maid right at the beginning, and they seem to have double teamed her, though they keep her panties and are just it seems like he's got a whole collection of women's underthings that he's got going. Like at one point we see him in his room and he looks up and there's all these garters and things. I'm like, are those for you or are those just trophies that you've kept?
It's very weird, actually, now I think about Lude, because in a way, although I think in a way the kind of the gay element is more overt than it is in Mr. Sloane, and yet at the same time, it's very reminiscent of the kind of the Robin Asquith type of figure in Confessions of a Window Cleaner. And I'm thinking of the scene when, I think it's Dennis, he's talking about this brothel that he wants to create, and he wants all these different kind of birds in it, and it's very much part of that kind of like macho young male swaggering sort of sex comedy character as well, isn't it? So it's a really weird fusion, I think, of two different sensibilities.
I want to share my favorite moment of this movie, and it's just a little thing, but it just makes me laugh so hard, is when all of the guys from the funeral parlor are coming in with the empty coffin and just laughing like crazy as they're walking in. And then as soon as the door opens, the main guy kind of turns. His look goes from jovial to completely somber, and then he suddenly adopts that whole, professional funeral parlor attendant type of role. And it's just like, okay, yeah, just to see that kind of two-faced nature of everyone that's in this movie. I mean, that they've got his lover coming in as one of the guys who drives the hearse, and he's just standing there kind of taking in everything. He's got that kind of Mr. Sloane, platinum blonde hair again. And I'm thinking that's definitely not natural, but it feels like he's very conscious of his appearance. And it feels like both of these guys are very into what they look like, though the son's hair is just so floofy and so like page boy cut. I'm like, I'm glad that has gone out of style.
Yeah, Luke feels very much more of 1970 than Sloane does. I think Sloane is somehow timeless, really, in a stronger way. I think that, like you said, the hairstyles and also just the design of the house as well. I mean, not very plausible for the main character, the Milo O'Shea character, to be living in, really. I mean, it's just this wild kind of psychedelic design, isn't it, really? So I think it's possibly one reason why that film is less loved, I think, because, it does capture some of the excesses of its period, I guess.
Yeah, and it's so psychedelic and things like that robbery scene where you've got the lights and the music and everything going. I'm still not sure why they had to be naked during that robbery scene, but hey, it works.
I think she says something about the forensics, that it would pick up traces in the clothing, but it's the flimsiest of pretexts, isn't it, really?
And then all of the great framing to prevent us seeing their cock and balls, just a lot of butts on screen. Very, very nice. Yeah, I don't think it's a bad movie. I just don't think it's nearly as strong as Mr. Sloane. And then I did want to talk a little bit more about Prick Up Your Ears. Like you said, it's a great film and really holds up all these years later. I wasn't sure when it came to the way that we are going back and forth in time, how well that worked, but I think it really does allows us to have a commentary about things when you get the Wallace Shawn and who is it, Vanessa Redgrave as...
Yeah, she plays the agent, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, when you get Wallace Shawn and Vanessa Redgrave talking to each other, or Shawn and the sister, or Shawn and some of these other people, just to have them be kind of the commentary on what we were seeing in the other scenes, I think works pretty well. And how interesting is it that Wallace Shawn is playing John Lahr, who was the biographer of Joe Orton, and that John Lahr is the son of Bert Lahr, the Cowardly Lion? Like, after he talked about, because there's tons of extras on the Mr. Sloane disc, and I'm sitting there watching this guy, and he's just like, oh yeah, well, my first biography was about Bert Lahr. And then I'm like, wait a second, you look like Bert Lahr. It was like, how dumb am I that I didn't make that connection right away?
Yeah, it is an odd combination though, isn't it? I think of, somebody coming from that background and then writing about this guy from Leicester. Yeah, it is a sort of an odd fit somehow. Yeah, and I believe John Lahr was married at one point to Connie Booth, who, of course, was wife of John Cleese as well at one point, and co-wrote Fawlty Towers. So it all somehow comes together, doesn't it, I guess?
Yeah, it just feels like he's out of place being in England. And they do make a big deal of that, as far as like when Vanessa Redgrave's character meets his wife, meets Anthea Lahr, and it's just like, oh, you're not American as well. Okay, interesting. All right. I love the scene when they talk about how Orton is saying, oh, I used to have to write all the dirty bits in my diaries in shorthand so my mother couldn't read it. And then they've got the wife of John Lahr and her mother going through and trying to just figure out what the shorthand says. I love that.
That's where she says, I had a long, slow wink.
Yes.
And I think, does that wink?
Watching this again after so many years, I was like, this really still works very well. And yeah, what incredible performances by Oldman and Molina. And man, oh man, it just really makes me appreciate Alfred Molina even more than I already do.
Very tough role as well, isn't it? Because I guess, technically he is the villain because of the of what happened with the murder. But yeah, I think it does manage to make you feel the sympathy for him really, and his position really.
Alfred Molina, I can't say enough good things. I mean, that scene in Boogie Nights.
Oh God,
Ray Head Jackson. Yeah,
that's yeah.
I mean, if you only see that, that's all you need.
Yeah, when he like quiets them all down so they can get to that big part in Sister Christian. Oh, it's so good.
And of course, borrowing a little from Bob Downey with the firecrackers in the background the whole time.
But yeah, to have Halliwell be such a force in Orton's life, and this, is he the cheated on wife? Is he the hanger on? Was he actually the power behind the throne kind of thing? The way that he's just like, well, that was, how they're talking about the screenplay for the Beatles. And he's like, well, I helped co-write that novel. You're not giving me any credit for this. And it just really kind of speaks to that whole thing as far as like how much of your art belongs to others, how much are your influences, and how much credit needs to be given to other people. And yeah, towards the end there, I was just like, wow, he's really just been shut out. Like the whole thing of, and again, because it's late 60s, this whole idea of how open can you be? And just that Vanessa Redgrave was kind of taken aback. Her character's taken aback by like, well, was he going to actually bring a friend to my office? The way that he says, like, do you mind if I bring a friend? It's like, was he really going to do that? Oh my gosh. Like this is kind of revolutionary. And then towards the end, when it's the Joe Orton and guest pass, and it's like, what, are you ashamed of me? Like, can I be your, like, why am I your +1 rather than my name on this pass kind of thing? And that seems to really be what puts him over the edge. And like, I was kind of surprised because he just keeps taking so much shit through the entire thing. And he is just so unhinged with his paranoia, the way that he obsessively cleans, especially when he's feeling pretty repressed. He just starts dusting everything. And when the murder actually happens, I was surprised because I knew it was going to happen. I mean, we start post-murder and we start with the whole idea of breaking down the door and everything. But I was just shocked that was what finally put him over the edge.
I guess, just a sad combination of circumstances, isn't it, really? And I think the fact that, yeah, like you say, he was shut out in terms of the relationship and in terms of just the celebration and adulation of Orton when, yeah, it's pretty clear, I think, from early on. I mean, because they were writing together. So, I mean, Halliwell, I think, did have a big role, I think, in shaping some of that sensibility. And yeah, I think it's in the diaries. And I think they talk about it in the Joe Orton Laid Bare documentary that there's this, I think, specific event where they went to this dinner party and just there was this television producer who was just really horrible with Halliwell. And he was just really probably, motivated by jealousy, actually, and it was just saying the most horrible things to him. And I guess you can see in retrospect how it just all came to this tipping point, really.
The one thing that caught my eye, too, when it came to Prick Up Your Ears is the whole thing with the Beatles and with Brian Epstein and this whole idea of, him being semi-closeted. I don't know when, because I've known for my, I think, entire life that Brian Epstein is gay. And I don't know how I knew that. I don't know if that was from watching the complete Beatles or where that information came from. But this whole thing of like, no, these are good boys. They would never do that. They would never smoke a joint. They would never sleep together. And you think to yourself, like, haven't I seen that movie Backbeat all about John Lennon being bi? And then the whole thing of like Rubber Soul On. I think they were pretty entrenched in the drug world.
We're nothing but grains of sand.
That was freaking transcendental, Paul McCartney. Don't you agree, John Lennon?
Yes, Dewey Cox. With meditation, there's no limit to what we can imagine.
What do you think, George Harrison, of the Beatles?
I don't know, I'm just trying to get some more songs on the album,
And as Ringo Starr, I'm not so interested in meditation. I just like to have fun.
But I have to say, I like your stuff.
You guys are almost as good as the Monkees. You guys are great.
Deliciously ironic, isn't it, that moment with the Epstein character? Yeah, because I believe that script, which I keep meaning to read, actually, because I think the script is out there of the film that he wrote for the Beatles. And yeah, apparently, I don't know if it's at the ending or in one thing, there's a scene where there's a female character that marries like all four Beatles together. So it's this kind of joint bisexual marriage, which I think is a wonderful idea. And apparently that was one of the problems that I think that, the producers had with it, that it was just considered, not wholesome enough, I guess.
And I kind of wonder if like Abbey Road Beatles would have been into that. And like how much of that is them versus how much of that is their management who's trying to protect them and form that image of them and keep that image safe, because they were like, the four lads from Liverpool kind of thing, and just a bunch of clean-cut young boys with that floppy haircuts and everything. And then, like before the 70s were up, because they didn't last that long, but before the 70s were up, it's just like long hair, mustaches, facial hair, just like all the things that were so anathema to, the general public at that point.
That's what I always hear from my parents, and I used to hear from my grandparents too, that we liked them originally, but then they kind of went weird, and this whole thing of going to India and taking drugs and stuff, and then we started to sort of like, I guess especially the grandparent generation were like, well, what's happened to these nice clean-cut lad from Liverpool? That was like Rolling Stones. They were the ones who were like that, not the Beatles.
I really found Joe Orton Laid Bare to be an interesting way of presenting his story. And especially the way that they would blend the plays with the bio as it's going on. And especially that they would have these actors who were pretty much limited to the plays, but they would be playing different roles at the same time. So I'm a big fan of Coupling, the TV show from, when was that? The 90s, maybe? Pre-Friends, I know it was. So to see Ben Miles in here basically playing Ed in Mr. Sloane, as well as some other roles too, that was a real treat for me to be able to see him show up in this. And just, I like the way that they were mixing all of this and also just having Orton be a character himself. And again, I think that, Brian Dick is the guy who plays the older Orton. He does a fantastic job. And it was just an unusual way of presenting a bio to an audience, I think.
Yeah, I wish I'd really had more chance in my life to see productions of his plays, and reading about the productions and who played in them. It's really fascinating. And I think especially for me, I would have loved to have seen there was a revival of his work in the mid-70s when I think they presented What the Butler Saw I think that was the second production, but that was the one where it really established its reputation. And in that production in 1975, it was directed by Lindsay Anderson. So I would have loved to have seen that. And then I think the Sloane revival in 75, you had Sloane played by Malcolm McDowell. So yeah, that would have been dream casting, really, I think.
I did try to track down some of the other adaptations of his stuff, including there's a Yugoslavian production of Entertaining Mr. Sloane that came out the same year as the 1970 film. It came out, I think it was a TV movie from November 4th, 1970. I would have loved to have seen what they were doing with that. There had been a TV adaptation of Mr. Sloane before that. You mentioned her name before. She did the commentary. She and
Emma Parker.
Yes, she was wonderful. And to hear her talk about some of these other versions of stuff, like she mentioned that it was the BBC iPlayer. I don't think we can get that here in the States, but who cares? We can always get our hands on anything if we want it that bad. But I could not find that ITV Playhouse version.
No, I was looking for that too. Yeah. And he did a few television plays, and there's one of a play that he did called the Erpingham Camp, which was made for, I think it was written for television, or I think he originally wanted it to be a film, again with Lindsay Anderson, but then he turned it into a television adaptation and then later into a stage version. But yeah, there's a I think from 1965 or 66, there's a TV play of that and a couple of others as well. And one of the sad things is just how badly the BBC treated their television output of that period. So a lot of stuff is much more difficult to find than it should be, I guess. There is I think it's from 1987, I think, or 88. There is a TV version of What the Butler Saw, which is on YouTube, and that's really wonderful.
I did not get a chance to see that. I should have checked that out.
I watched that again, and it's just that is just breathlessly brilliant. It's just one of those things that at a certain point you kind of stop trying to follow it, really, because it's just one kind of narrative complication after another, and it makes your head spin. But yeah, that is so, I think, was not really appreciated at the time because I think it was just too much. It was, I think, his most transgressive piece, really. But yeah, that is just really brilliant. But by the way, yeah, you mentioned the library books. I believe those are possible to see now. I think there is I think it's maybe at the original library where they did it, that I think there is a display of those library books. And I guess that goes back to the idea of collage, doesn't it? But yeah, I would love to, I must take a trip one day to Leicester and look at those, because I think the pictures that I've seen of them, they're just so funny. And my favorite one is the one of the little monkey's face plastered into that rose in that book about roses. And for some reason, that was the one that upset people in particular. I don't know why, but yeah, just that little monkey's face is just so funny, I think.
Yeah, I love how Vanessa Redgrave's like, oh, you were in jail? Oh, the press is going to love that. How she's like already starting to form as an image for him as she's talking to him about his previous work.
I mean, the thing for me is someone who is not extremely well acquainted, I think, and I appreciate you for having me on for this one. It definitely opens up a door for me to seek out these other films and really learn a bit more about Joe Orton and his work.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
I remember my father once said that if you ever wanted to look at someone's soul, you'd have to ask to look at their dreams. Dreams are like light. You can't catch them with your hands because you can't catch something you don't really see.
I always wanted to fly. I'm gonna live forever until one day I wake up.
If you believe in your dreams, you could be sure that any force, a tornado, volcano, or a typhoon wouldn't be able to knock you out of love.
You see this?
Yeah.
Proteins. When you see a beautiful woman, these extra proteins go directly to your brain. Where do you get all this stuff? It's a scientific fact.
I never thought it could happen, but love hit me like an elephant. Being caught in a dream of two women is the craziest storm you'll ever find yourself in.
You're old enough to be his mother. But I'm not. I'm his lover. Your nephew is a wild animal in bed.
Grace, do you think it would be really bad if I kissed you? I was thrown into a jungle of dreams because I was really flying in love for the first time. I couldn't say life was beautiful. And even though I no longer felt like a fish and realized I knew nothing, I was happy to be alive.
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at Arizona Dream. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Rob and Jonathan. So, Jonathan, what have you been up to, sir?
So I recently wrote a booklet for the new edition of the film Krakatit, the Otakar Vavra film from the 40s, which is a Czech film about nuclear apocalypse. So that's coming out. I think that's already come out from Deaf Crocodile. I've got a few other things in the pipeline. I try and regularly write things for the Czech National Film Archive website. So I try and post updates on my Blue Sky account. So if you follow me on Blue Sky, I try and update everything that I'm doing on there. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
And Rob, how about yourself?
Just enjoying life in the high desert, working on a rewrite second draft of my zombie novel. And I may have something else to announce later in the year, but I can't say for sure yet. So,
are you pregnant?
I'm definitely not pregnant. But the ghost of an old project is knocking at my door, and I'm going to see if the door is going to open or not. So, I'm sorry to be enigmatic, but I'll tell you more later, maybe.
Well, you will have plenty of chances since you're going to be on the show quite a few times this year. So, I look forward to that. And I look forward to having you back, Jonathan, as always.
Thank you. Thank you. I always love being here.
Thanks again, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Do you want to support physical media and get great movies in the mail? Head over to scarecrow.com and try Scarecrow Video's incredible rent-by-mail service, the largest publicly accessible collection in the world. You'll find films there entirely unavailable elsewhere. Get what you want when you want it without the scrolling. And yes, of course, they have entertaining Mr. Sloane. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
'Cause he gets up in the morning, then he goes to work at 9, and he comes back home at 5:30, gets the same train every time. 'Cause his world is built on punctuality, it never fails. And he's all so good, and he's all so fine, and he's all so healthy in his body and his mind. He's a well-respected man about town, doing the best things so conservatively. And his mother goes to meetings while his father pulls a maid, and she stirs the tea with counsellors while discussing foreign trade. And she passes looks as well as bills at every suave young man. 'Cause he's all so good, and he's all so fine, and he's all so healthy in his body and his mind. He's a well-respected man about town, doing the best things so conservatively. And he likes his own backyard, and he likes his fags the best, 'cause he's better than the rest, and his own sweat smells the best. And he hopes to grab his father's root when Batewood passes on. 'Cause he's all so good, and he's all so fine, and he's all so healthy in his body and his mind. He's a well-respected man about town, doing the best things so conservatively. And he plays a song to Charles, and he goes to the regatta. He adores the girl next door, 'cause he's dying to get at her. But his mother knows the best about the matrimonial snakes. 'Cause he's all so good, and he's all so fine, and he's all so healthy in his body and his mind. He's a well-respected man about town, doing the best things so conservative.